Hello, hello, test, test, test. Welcome to another live stream from Zesty. We're just going to play with a couple of our configuration before we get started, but today we're going to be talking about building the presentation layer in a way that works for the marketer and for the developer. So using if checks, setting up content the right way. That's what we'll be discussing. We'll go over the bullet list soon. Just going to be checking my output. Say hello to the chat. Hello, chat. I'm going to post the link to the live stream examples that we posted from last week in chat as well. That's on GitHub. You can pull that down. And I'm running from that example completely, so everything you see here is available on the live stream. Let's check the capture from our computer. There we go. That should have music now. Cool. Stream beats from Harris Heller, free of charge. Thank you, sir. All right, here we go. All right, so we're going to get started. We're going to talk about some of the things about the presentation layer and when setting it up. So when working with a headless CMS, you're going to be working with a marketer in conjunction with a developer. It's typically the two pairs that work. And there's going to be often normal things on a page. We can look at this page here. This is on the example from last week again, all the code posted in chat. And it's available here on this public repository to see on GitHub, just live stream examples. There are things in this page, right? Let's take a look at what this page looks like. Views, and this one is our home page. And you can see we have an image that loads here. We have a title, loads here, a subtitle here, and we have this rich text that comes from a WYSIWYG. And then we have my articles, and it's looping through articles here. So this is great, but what's going to happen if subtitle doesn't exist? What's going to happen if there aren't articles? And these are the things we want to build to make sure the presentation layer it's smart and it can adapt to the way the content is changing. Otherwise, you could have things break. And working in the headless world, you can get a client error and the whole page could not render, and that's not really good for marketing. You could say that is a disaster if that's happening. So there are things we can do to check if title exists. So what we're going to do is we're going to stay in this homepage, and we're going to make it adaptive so that it understands, okay, if the content exists, work with the content. If not, don't. And the benefits that come from this is that, and I'm going to write it in the README, is like, these are like the content fallbacks, right? And this would be presentation logic based on existing or not existing content. And just, it's got to be graceful. You could have graceful fillers too. So you could have like default fillers. You can have an image that, like, if a base image isn't there, like if this image is missing, we could show another image, for example. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're using this setup that we set up in the last live stream. We'll be ongoing. We'll be using this one as an ongoing test in our examples. And this is Zesty instance. It's got a little bit of content. Last week we added, the pictures of the dog, some articles, and a homepage. We're going to jump right into that. So I have that manager open here, and I'm going to look at the homepage. So right now we have this Next.js starter example as our title. And if we're looking at our home page, you see we're going to output that title in an H1 right here. So we'll just confirm this is all hooked up. We'll add exclamation mark, refresh, see what the experience is. You see the exclamation mark. All right. What happens if there's nothing here? Let's just hit save. Let's refresh the page. this one's required, so I guess I can't show that. Let's use the subtitle. Again, subtitle is this is awesome. We're going to delete that, hit save. What happens if that is absent? Nothing shows. That's graceful. Um, it's not always going to be the case. What's happening is this is outputting an empty h2, which also isn't ideal because now you have an empty HTML tag. Let's inspect and see that. So now we have an empty h2. So there are ways that you can write for this to not have an empty h2, and we're going to show how that looks in JSX. So every time you open up these brackets, you're essentially entering, a line of JavaScript. And you can use what's called ternaries to get access to things. You can use or statements. So I could say this or I'd say the and in this situation. And then I can return this whole line. Gets a little weird, but so like I could return this now. And now notice that this, what this statement is saying is if this has value, all right, and right now the value is empty, so it doesn't. And it's really weird, it's a little awkward, but this is just the way the syntax goes. And this, so basically if both these statements are true, it's going to output. All right, that's what the ampersand is. And this is going to be true because we know we're outputting a JSX right here as a return. So if this has value, then I guess and then output this h2 with the subtitle content. So if you notice now, and I'm looking inside, I have my h1 and now my h2 is absent because of my value. I have no value for subtitle, which is really convenient. So this is one way to check. And now if I go back in and say I now have a subtitle, and remember I changed this remotely, so I have to give a hard refresh for Next to get new data. And now I have a subtitle. Now I have a subtitle. My subtitles, now I have a subtitle. And notice how now we get the h2. So now taking a look here is like, does this have value? Yes, true. And this return statement is going to be true because we're just outputting a string. So both these are true and they both return. So that's really nice. Okay, so this is one example. So we can do this in other ways. We could say like an or statement too, which is kind of cool. So we could say something like or, right? So this would end up being this is my backup. All right, so let's see what happens here. And I could do, I believe I can do a return like, I can't do because I'm doing a check. I can't do a return there. I have to say like this or that. So now my subtitle, notice that it outputs, right? So if I have it, it's going to output. So in this scenario, it would probably be better to wrap, in this particular syntax, wrap this in an H2. All right, let's use an H3 because we're using H2 above just so we can see the differences. So save. And it's not very happy with me there. This is a string. I gotta make it a string. All right, this is my backup. Okay, so here's another scenario. So in this first one, we're saying if the content exists, output it. But what if we always want content? If this doesn't exist. So if this content doesn't exist, I'm gonna call this is my backup subtitle. I'm periodically checking chat too, so if you have questions, you can just ask in chat. You can even say hello in chat. I see there's a few people watching. And if anything is not being clear, just ask in chat and I can go over it. So coming back, I have a subtitle. Let's go ditch my subtitle now. Let's go blank this out, hit save, and we're gonna give it a refresh because new data, and we need next to make a new check. Okay, so what happened? Now my value of content subtitle is empty. And if we notice, if I go inspect here, I now have an H1 and H3. So let's just look at the code and read why that happened. So H1's required, so I know that they can't hit save or publish without having a title, so I can safely have that. It's also good to have backups because Never can be too safe, but we know that we're going to get an H1 for now. We're just going to leave that. So second, we're going to say if I have value for subtitle, output H2 my subtitle. I don't have value, so if you look, there's no H2 outputting. Next, H3. If you see we have an H3, and this is my backup subtitle. So what we're saying here, if we have subtitle, output it, or, so if this is false, if this is empty, or this is my backup subtitle. So this is how I can output a backup. So these are two like graceful fallback. Like this isn't, I'd say this is more of a graceful fallback, whereas this is just like you can gracefully build a different experience or interface. So, you know, and with marketing, my opinion, it's good to have templates so that way marketers can jam out pages, but not every page is going to have equal parts, right? There could be parts of the page that have a subtitle, there could be parts that have images, there could be parts that have relational items. You can always check if those things exist and then output the page, so like the whole page changes based upon the content, not really the template. The template is built to adapt to the content you're getting, and this is what this allows you to do. So in this scenario, if I recognize the subtitle, I could actually output a whole different component here, right? Not just like an H2 for example. So let's go ahead and make a component. We'll go in component, and I'm just going to make a component. Let's just organize it. We'll call it like, I don't know, elements. Not the best title name, but we'll call it like new file, my h2.js. It's really, let's give it a better one. Call it header2. We're going to import React from React, and we're going to export default function. I'll call it header2, and we'll return. We'll give it a little bit of a flavor here. We'll return a div with an h2 in it, and we're going to ask for the text here, output text. So like another way to gracefully fall back to in this scenario, which we can show as another option, we can give it default to text, but we won't yet. So right now I'm going to return a div with h2. I need to keep that on that line. I guess I could do this to keep it clean. You don't necessarily need to do that, but the syntax highlighting is looking better with that. So this is a component, and I'm just going to output a div with h2 in it. And I'm going to go back to home page, and if I just start typing this should just figure it out for me, header2. And if you notice how, see how it automatically included that for me, which is great. So I'm now going to, now that it's included, I'm going to delete that aspect of it, and I'm going to replace this. And if you remember, we added text equals, and I'm going to move this into text. And this, we can shorthand close that. All right, so what I'm doing here now is if I have a subtitle, I'm going to output my component. Let's save. Let's see what happens. Give it a hard refresh. We don't have a subtitle right now, so I'm not outputting a component. My subtitle exists. Save. Remember in Next that the hot reloads don't do fetch requests, so you got to give a refresh. And now we're loading this component here. So, which is cool. So like this component could be a whole experience, right? If now I can go have here, like say, I don't know, maybe I want to throw an HR in here or something, right? Another HR. Let's get crazy. Right, just to like really prove that that is a running component. So now I'm changing, essentially I'm changing the presentation layer based upon the content I'm getting, and if I'm not going to get that content, let's just remove the content again, refresh, that component goes away. So my presentation is adapting to the content that I have, and it's possible because I'm writing logical statements to say like, if this exists, do this. If this exists, if this doesn't exist, essentially, do this. So with components, you could also you can write components in a little bit different way. So if I was to go like this, I should get an error because I'm missing text, right? Let's just hit save. And I guess it's just gracefully not doing anything. This is not getting text here. If you notice, it's still outputting my HRs. But for here, this is a place I can write my fallback data, right? So if I'm not passing information, I can go the fallback data. So this is another like way of like graceful redundancy for setting up your components on page, is that you can have this type. If you're not passing something, you can fall back, similar to how we're doing this. So that's another option that you can run. And then if you do have the data, I'm going to delete this. So if I do have the data, it's not going to say fallback anymore, and I can prove that by, I have the subtitle. Right? And if you notice, I have the subtitle exists, and I'm sending it as text, and it's overwriting. So this is particularly useful, for like images, which is really nice. Because like sometimes if you have a blog article and you may have just a default image, and if they don't upload an image, you can fall back to an image. It's the same concept. Okay. So these are content fallbacks, logic based upon existing or non-existing content, and graceful, and you can have fillers. So let's push it a little bit further. We're going to expand, or basically this image right here is really important. So there's ways to check fallbacks for images, and in this example, I have this image. If I get rid of it and hit save, this should break the page because I'm directly trying to call the data. And when you have data references this far out, especially off arrays, like this should throw an error. Let's see. See, so now we have an error. So this is real bad because when it was just looking for like plain text, it wasn't. It didn't display, but now we're getting errors. So like if we were to be live in production and someone deleted the image and hit publish, we now have a broken page, which is very bad. So how can we check for this? There are ways to leverage the same exact output, and you can do it when you're setting a value, an attribute on a element. So we're just going to follow the same methodology. So we could say that, or so we could just use an or statement here. And let's go grab, we need an image. We had an image, but we can't see our image anymore. Let's just go like this for now. But this is still an error. So why is this still an error? Is that it's still mad because it's trying to access off this array. So you can add question marks inside of your object call. This is newer to JavaScript to check if that value exists. But you still can't do it this full call out. You have to just do it off the top level value that you're checking initially of this array. So I believe I can check to see if the array exists and then fall back. Could be wrong about this one. There it is. So I'm checking that level. So I could say if this exists, right? And this is where we run into what's called the ternary. So the very first part of a ternary is the true false statement. So this is going to be true if the object exists. So then you do a question mark after the start the ternary, and we're not going to use an or statement here. And now we can use the full path. If this exists, I know that I can access this now. .url. Otherwise, I'm going to fall back to nothing. But really, I'm going to fall back to Jax because I'm going to grab copy image address. I'm just going to grab this picture of Jax. Just cropped, whatever is fine. So what I'm saying here, and I'll break it down so you can see it a little bit better on the view. Get rid of this extra. Alright, so this is my image. I'm saying source, and I'm using a ternary. I'm saying if this value exists, and so this becomes my boolean. I'm going to then output the URL that I know exists off this data. Otherwise, I'm going to fall back to this image. So this is a ternary. And since this value doesn't exist, well, that image is now huge. Let me give it let's see, width equals 150. Okay. That way we can still see our page. So, and what I'm using there for those of you who didn't catch last live stream is we're using Zesty's on the fly image manipulation, which you can just pass parameters to change the image in real time. All right, let's go over this. If this value exists, output the value I want off of that data. Otherwise, fall back to this image. So now I have an image fallback. It's graceful. If I go back into my CMS and I select an image, we were using this one here. Let's select it, hit save. I reopen my local host. I have to refresh because changes to remote don't hot load. And next, you have to hard refresh. Now I have the image that was selected. Otherwise, I have this nice fallback. So again, this is another way of doing it. So you have this kind of this double truthy statement. I guess maybe that's what you'd call it, truthy. That's a real word, but you can use a double truthy statement where it's like, if this awesome, now output that, in this component. You have this or statement saying, if this exists, output that, otherwise fall back. And then we also have a ternary statement where we say, if this, yes, output that, otherwise output the fallback. So the ternary, the way I'm using them is that if I'm checking a data source that has depth and has an array that I'm unknown if those objects or if those values exist in the array, you have to use a ternary. If there's another way to do it, you could please comment or say in chat, but as I understand it, when you're dealing with data arrays, you have to do this. If you have default data, in the array or like an empty array, it still works, but in our case, we don't return the data array if there's no data in the array. So that's the exercise of like fallbacks in the presentation layer. This can be used in a lot of ways. So it could be, you can combine different examples. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see, I'm going to create a component that is a header that if there is a subtitle and a title, I'm going to have this custom component. If there's only a title, I'm going to have another component. So let's go ahead and code for that. So how would I check that? And how I'm going to check that is, I'll just write it down below. I'm basically going to say if this and title, right? And so we're doing like a triple truthy. Right? And I'm going to break this down so it's a little bit easier to read, just from the size of my code editor. Alright, so now we're going to say if subtitle and title, then set my header 2. So I'm getting this output again for header 2. I'm going to create a new component for this one. I'm going to create a component. I'm going to copy this header 2, and I'm going to call it awesome header, because when we have two pieces of content, it's going to be awesome. So call this awesome header, and I'm just going to rename this to awesome header. And what's going to be so awesome about my header, I don't know what's going to be so awesome about it. Let's come up with something pretty awesome. Alright, let's say, so this will be title, and for the bottom, I'm going to call it subtitle. I'm not going to give this any fallback data, because the way I'm asking for it, I expect. Like I'm checking up front, and I'm expecting the output. So I'm not going to give a fallback up here. Alright, so what's my awesome header going to look like? It's going to have a background color of, I don't know, neon green or something. capital C, sea foam, sea green. It's gonna have sea green because I was in the ocean yesterday. It's gonna have a sea green background. And this is my awesome header. And I need to make sure I'm outputting my title, so I'll do an H1 here. This will just be title. I'm gonna ditch this and this. And then I'll have an H4 for my subtitle. Alright, cool. So awesome header, this is my components elements awesome header. So I come back over to my home page and I need to import awesome header. I can just, with my IDE, I'm using VS Code. It'll automatically include this, very convenient. And I have to change my reference to awesome header here because I'm accepting a title. In this case, it'll be content title and subtitle. Save. Look at that awesome header. Wow. Super sweet. So now if I'm missing subtitle, or if I'm missing title, title's required, but let's just go ahead and see what happens if we ditch the subtitle. So it's an empty field. We're going to hard refresh, so Next gets remote data. And we're not outputting our awesome header anymore. It's really, really sad, but we don't have the right data for it, right? We're missing subtitles. So in this instance, we don't have the right data to output an awesome header, so we just don't get an awesome header. And this is like, how is the presentation changing? Again, is like, okay, let's check for two types of data now, and then we can output the awesome header. So we could do the same thing with an image, right? We could say, you can toss this image reference in here, and we can add, you know, the image in here as well. And I'm going to copy my reference here. And I'm gonna know, like, okay, if I have a subtitle, title, and this, output my awesome header. All right, so I'm gonna save that, and I have to update awesome header to accept the image. So let's take an image in here, and then we're gonna make it a background, and make it really cool. Background image, and then we can just say image like that. I think we have to make this a string literal because it's still, I want to say it goes like this, and because this is CSS. I think like that. All right, cool. All right, so we have to, so what we just set up was we accept an image, and we're going to use this awesome header. It's going to now use a background image. I'm going to make sure I spell that right. Background image, and it'll use the image as the background. Alright, so we got to go back into Content Manager, which is Zesty, and say, cool subtitle, bro. Cool. And let's refresh. Look at that. Now we're passing an image. So what happens if we don't have these things? We could fall back to using like header 2, right? I want to say this is how this works, and I may be incorrect, but we can just fall back to, or header 2. So notice how we're not showing header 2 down here. We're gonna go ahead and ditch cool subtitle, bro. Refresh. And then we're falling back to the header 2, which has title here. So this is messy. It's not super clean, but we're just showing that you can then start combining these pieces of data. I might have to do this in a, let's see, like this. Just like, you know, doing math. So that way it says if all these are true, or this output here. So Again, it's about just making the presentation adaptive. And you can do this with bigger elements, right? I'm showing very simple components here, but that's the concept. Let's bring this back. Subtitles are fun. So that concludes the session today. And if you have any questions or comments, you want to see more like this, please let us know in the comments. And we'll see you. It's going to be next week. Today's Thursday, I think. So it'll be next week on Tuesday. We'll be streaming again. So like and subscribe, and we'll catch you then. Take care.